The wind screamed across the high ground, sharp as broken glass. Snow lashed sideways, blinding and relentless, swallowing the narrow trail beneath the horse's hooves. Caleb Whitmore leaned low in the saddle, his coat already stiff with ice, his breath burning his lungs with every pull of air. Below him, far too close, the ground dropped away into a frozen draw. One wrong step and horse and rider would vanish into the white nothing. Then he saw it. Through the storm, through the chaos, a thin, defiant line of smoke rising where no fire should burn. Someone was out there, alone, in weather that killed men who knew better. Caleb urged the horse forward, jaw set, knowing one thing for certain. Whatever waited at the end of that trail would change more than just his morning ride. Hope you enjoyed this story. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear where you're watching from. Now, let's continue with the story. By the time the storm eased, the danger had passed, but the question it left behind had not. Caleb Whitmore was no stranger to Wyoming winters. The Bighorn Basin had shaped him the way it shaped stone, slowly, harshly, without mercy. He had ridden through blizzards before, slept under skies that offered no shelter, and learned early that hesitation was often deadlier than risk. Still, the sight of smoke on that ridge stayed with him long after the wind died down. At first light the next morning, he rode again, this time by choice. The land stretched wide and quiet, the kind of quiet that came only after a storm had spent itself. Snow lay thick in the draws, untouched and glittering, while the ridgelines stood bare and brown where the wind had scoured them clean. Caleb rode the way he always did, steady, unhurried, eyes sharp. He was a powerful cowboy, built by decades in the saddle, his strength less about size than endurance. People in nearby towns spoke his name with a certain respect, not because he talked loudly or spent freely, but because when things went wrong, lost cattle, broken fences, bad men, Caleb Whitmore handled them. The ridge came into view just as the sun crested the horizon. There it was again. Smoke. Not wild. Not careless. A thin, steady plume rising straight from a stone chimney, half hidden among twisted juniper and wind-worn rock. The cabin beneath it looked old, older than most folks remembered, but something about it had changed. The roof no longer sagged the way it once had. The door sat square in its frame. Someone had been tending to it. Caleb slowed his horse. That cabin had been empty for years, built back when trappers still argued with the land instead of yielding to it. It had long ago been written off as another relic the basin would eventually reclaim. Caleb himself had passed it countless times, always meaning to deal with it someday. But someday never came, until now. He dismounted a short distance away, tying the reins with care. The snow crunched under his boots as he approached, every instinct alert but calm. Whoever lived here wasn't hiding. That alone set them apart from troublemakers. Before he could knock, the door opened. A woman stood there, framed by firelight and shadow. She held a lantern in one hand, a split log tucked against her hip. Her coat was worn but clean, her posture straight despite the cold. She looked at Caleb without flinching. "Morning," she said. Her voice was steady. No fear, no apology. Caleb felt something shift inside him, not alarm, but attention. "Morning," he replied. "Didn't expect to find anyone up here?" "I imagine not." She stepped aside slightly, not in surrender but invitation. Warm air drifted out, carrying the scent of wood smoke and dried herbs. "You're welcome to come in," she said. "It's colder than it looks." Caleb hesitated. He had expected excuses, or lies, or panic. Instead, he found himself nodding and stepping across the threshold. Inside, the cabin told a story of quiet determination. The walls were patched where they'd once let in the wind. A woven rug lay near the hearth. Shelves held jars neatly labeled in careful handwriting. Nothing fancy. Nothing wasted. Everything earned. "You fixed this place," Caleb said. "I did what needed doing," the woman replied. "Winter doesn't care about intentions." He studied her now, seeing what the storm had hidden. She was older than he'd first thought. Late 50s, maybe early 60s. But there was strength in her hands, in the way she moved. The kind that came from surviving things no one else saw. "I'm Caleb Whitmore," he said at last. "This land's been under my watch a long time." "I know who you are." She met his gaze. "My name's Eleanor Avery. Most folks call me Nell. You know this cabin sits on Whitmore land." "I do." She didn't rush her answer. "I wasn't trying to take anything. It was empty. I needed shelter. That's all." Most people, when cornered, begged. Others blustered. Nell Avery did neither. "How long do you plan on staying?" Caleb asked. "Long enough to stand on my own again." Her eyes didn't leave his. "I'm not looking for charity. Just time." The words stayed with him long after he stepped back into the cold. Caleb rode away with more weight on his mind than when he'd arrived. The land made sense to him. People usually did, too. But Nell Avery didn't fit neatly into any problem he'd solved before. She wasn't careless. She wasn't weak. And she wasn't dishonest. That night, sleep came slow. By morning, he had made a decision. He returned to the ridge with a folded sheet of paper in his coat pocket. Nell was outside, splitting wood, her movements efficient and sure. She finished the log before acknowledging him. "You came back," she said. "I said I would." He handed her the paper. A simple agreement. She could stay through the winter. In return, she would work, checking fence lines, surveying water sources, handling the far corners other hands rarely reached. Nell read every word. "One change," she said, looking up. "This ends when winter does. No obligation beyond that." Caleb considered, then nodded. He amended the line and signed. She followed, her name written clear and steady. As he rode away, Caleb didn't know what unsettled him more. The fact that he'd just broken his own rules, or the quiet certainty that this was only the beginning. Down in town, names would soon surface. Papers would be questioned. Old wrongs would stir. And somewhere on that ridge, a woman who refused to beg had just stepped onto a path that would test them both. Winter had only begun. The days that followed settled into a rhythm shaped by cold mornings and long shadows. Snow came and went in thin layers, never enough to stop the work, always enough to make it harder. Nell Avery took to her tasks without complaint. She rose before sunrise, tended her fire, and set out across the land with a borrowed horse and a folded map tucked into her coat. Caleb watched from a distance, careful not to interfere. He had learned long ago that capable people revealed themselves best when left alone. Eli Brooks did not share that patience. "She's quiet," Eli said one evening, leaning against the fence near the main corral. "Too quiet for someone with nothing to hide." Caleb tightened a cinch strap without looking up. "Quiet doesn't mean crooked." "Maybe not," Eli replied. "But she showed up out of nowhere. That cabin's been empty for years." Caleb straightened. So had half this land before someone bothered to work it. Eli said nothing more, but the doubt lingered. Caleb knew it would. Men like Eli trusted what they could see, and Nell Avery carried her past the way some people carried scars, kept out of sight, but never gone. Nell felt those eyes on her as she rode the outer lines. She did not resent them. Suspicion was a language she understood. She marked broken rails, noted drifted snow choking shallow creeks, and returned each evening with careful reports, written in a small, worn notebook. Her notes were precise. Distances measured by landmarks, water levels estimated with a practiced eye. Caleb read them late at night by lamplight and found nothing careless among the pages. In town, the winter brought people closer together. Ash Hollow was small enough that news traveled faster than horses. Martha Collins, who ran the general store, noticed Nell's presence before most. She had seen many women come through over the years, some fleeing men, some fleeing loss, some simply worn thin by time. "Who's the woman riding Whitmore land?" Martha asked Caleb when he stopped in for supplies. "Her name's Nell Avery," he said. "She's working through the winter." Martha studied him over the counter. "That's so?" "That's so." Martha nodded slowly. "Then I hope folks leave her be." Caleb said nothing, but he appreciated the sentiment. He also knew hope rarely kept trouble away. The first real tension came on a gray afternoon when Nell returned later than expected. The sky had darkened early, heavy with the promise of more snow. Caleb stood near the barn, counting the minutes he pretended not to notice. When she finally appeared at the crest of the ridge, he exhaled without meaning to. Her horse was lathered. Nell herself looked winded, one glove torn at the seam. "There's a marker missing along the eastern draw," she said before he could ask. "Looks like it was pulled, not weathered down." Caleb's jaw tightened. "You're sure?" "I am." Missing markers meant questions. Questions led to paperwork. And paperwork, in the wrong hands, could turn into something far worse. That night, Caleb went into town again. He hadn't planned to, but unease had a way of steering him. Inside the saloon, conversation dipped as he entered. He ordered coffee instead of whiskey and took a seat near the stove. That was when he heard the name. Victor Hale. It came from a pair of men near the door, spoken casually, like it meant nothing at all. Caleb stiffened. He had crossed paths with Hale years ago, just enough to know the man dealt in smooth words and sharper deeds. Hale was a land broker, or claimed to be. He specialized in properties no one bothered to protect. Widows, absentees, people without the strength or means to fight back. Caleb's thoughts went to Nell. He rode back under a sky heavy with stars, the cold biting deeper than before. The cabin was dark when he arrived, but a lantern flickered to life as he approached. Nell opened the door, her expression guarded but calm. "Have you heard of Victor Hale?" Caleb asked. Her hand tightened on the lantern handle, just slightly. "Yes," she said. That was all it took. Caleb didn't press her then. Some truths needed room to surface. He told her only to be careful, then rode away with a growing certainty that winter had brought more than cold onto his land. The next morning, he sent word to his nephew, Jonah Whitmore, in Cheyenne. Jonah was a lawyer, young, sharp, and deeply committed to the letter of the law. If papers existed, Jonah would find them. Meanwhile, Nell continued her work, though something in her had shifted. She avoided town now, slept lighter. When she rode, she scanned the horizon more often than before. One evening, as snow began to fall again, Caleb found her sitting on the cabin steps, staring out across the basin. "Whatever Hale did," he said quietly, "you don't have to face it alone." Nell looked up at him, her eyes tired but resolute. I faced it alone once. That's how I survived. Caleb nodded. He understood survival, but he also understood something else now, that some battles, left unchallenged, only grew sharper with time. Somewhere, papers were waiting to be questioned, names were waiting to resurface, and the winter, relentless and watchful, was far from finished. The reply from Cheyenne arrived 3 days later, folded once and sealed with Jonah Whitmore's neat hand. Caleb read it standing near the barn, the cold air fogging his breath as he scanned each line. I've located records connected to the name Eleanor Avery. There are irregularities. I'm coming north. Caleb closed the letter and slipped it into his coat. Irregularities was a lawyer's word for trouble. By then, the land had begun to show signs of strain. Snow packed hard against the fences. Creeks slowed beneath ice. The cattle moved reluctantly, their instincts dulled by cold and confinement. Nell continued riding the far lines, her notebook filling with careful observations. Yet Caleb noticed the way her shoulders tensed whenever she passed the eastern draw. The missing marker remained unfound. Jonah arrived just before dusk, his city coat ill-suited for Wyoming weather. He looked younger than Caleb remembered, his hands smooth, his eyes sharp with curiosity more than caution. "You live like this year-round?" Jonah asked as they stepped inside the ranch house. Caleb poured coffee. "The land doesn't change because you want it to." Jonah smiled faintly and pulled a folder from his satchel. "Let's talk about Eleanor Avery." They spread the papers across the table. Deeds, transfers, notices of forfeiture. Jonah tapped one document with his pen. "This signature," he said. "It doesn't match the others." Caleb leaned closer. He didn't need legal training to see it. The loops were too round, the hand too careless. "Filed 2 winters ago," Jonah continued, "by a broker named Victor Hale." Caleb's jaw set. "Can it be challenged?" "It can," Jonah said carefully, "but paper tends to favor whoever holds it longest." Outside, the wind rose again. Caleb found Nell the next morning mending a torn saddle strap. He didn't soften the truth. "Hale filed a deed in your name," he said. "One that says you gave up your land." Nell went still. For a moment, Caleb thought she might refuse to speak. Then she nodded once. "My mother trusted him," she said. "Ruth Avery believed in rules, believed that if you did things right, the law would do right by you." Her voice remained even, but the memory weighed heavy between them. "Hale came with papers and patience," Nell went on. "Said the land was under dispute. Said signing would protect us until it was resolved. My mother signed. I wasn't there. By the time I came back, the house was gone." Caleb said nothing. There were losses words couldn't touch. "I won't sign another thing," Nell added. "Not ever." Jonah listened to all of it later that afternoon, his expression troubled. "We'll need witnesses," he said. "Proof that Hale's done this before." "That won't be hard," Caleb replied. "Men like him leave trails." The storm came sooner than expected. It rolled down from the north late in February, swallowing daylight and sound alike. By nightfall, the eastern fence line gave way beneath drifting snow. A group of cattle broke through, moving toward the frozen creek beyond the draw. Caleb sent 2 hands after them. Hours passed. No return. He saddled his horse without a word. Halfway down the trail, he saw a familiar shape ahead, Nell, riding hard against the wind. "You shouldn't be out here," he called. "Neither should you," she shouted back. "The ice won't hold if they panic." She was right. Together they worked through the night, guiding the cattle inch by inch. When they found one of the hands injured, Nell knelt without hesitation, binding his leg with practiced care. Dawn broke pale and quiet. By the time they returned, the storm had taken more than sleep. It had taken doubt. Eli Brooks met them at the barn, his earlier suspicions gone. "She belongs out there," he said simply. Caleb nodded. Spring crept in slowly. Snow melted into streams. Letters from Cheyenne followed, each confirming what Jonah already knew. Hale's claims were thin, his methods familiar. One evening, Caleb handed Nell a final envelope. Inside were copies of restored titles. "You're free to go," he said. Nell folded the papers carefully. "I know." She looked out across the land, green beginning to push through brown. "But I won't," she said. Caleb felt the shift then. Not ownership, not obligation, but something steadier. Respect. Below them, the basin stretched wide and waiting. And somewhere beyond it, Victor Hale would soon learn that some names, once spoken, did not fade quietly into winter. Winter loosened its grip reluctantly, as if unwilling to release the land it had claimed. The snow retreated in patches, revealing mud and brittle grass beneath, but the cold lingered in the mornings, sharp enough to remind everyone that the season was not finished yet. Work resumed with a new urgency. Fences had to be reset. Water lines cleared. The land demanded attention, and it did not wait for legal matters to settle. Nell Avery worked beside the men now, no longer watched with doubt, but with quiet acceptance. She rode where others hesitated, measuring distances by memory and instinct. When she spoke, it was with purpose. Caleb noticed how easily the work crews adjusted around her, how her presence brought order rather than disruption. She was not trying to prove herself. She simply belonged. Yet beneath the steady rhythm of daily labor, tension simmered. Victor Hale had not disappeared. Jonah's letters made that clear. The man had left Ash Hollow, but he had not abandoned his claims. He had begun contacting offices farther south, pressing for recognition of the old deeds. Paper moved faster than truth, and Caleb knew it. "You'll have to confront him," Jonah said during a late-night discussion by the stove. "Sooner rather than later." Caleb nodded. "I intend to." Nell overheard more than she let on. She said nothing at first, but Caleb could sense the weight returning to her shoulders. One evening, as the sun dipped low and shadows stretched across the basin, she approached him near the corrals. "You don't owe me this fight," she said. Caleb rested his arms on the fence. "I'm not doing it for you alone." That answer seemed to satisfy her, though it did not erase her concern. The confrontation came unexpectedly. Hale returned to Ash Hollow under the guise of routine business, his coat clean, his smile practiced. He requested a meeting at the county office, confident that documents would speak louder than reputation. Caleb arrived with Jonah at his side. The room was small, crowded with shelves of aging records. Hale greeted them warmly, as if they were old friends. "Mr. Whitmore," Hale said, "I hear you've taken an interest in disputed land." Caleb met his gaze without flinching. "I've taken an interest in the truth." Jonah laid out the evidence calmly, forged signatures, patterned claims, testimonies from others Hale had wronged. The county clerk listened, uneasy but attentive. Hale's smile thinned. "Accusations are easy," Hale said. "Proof is what matters." "Then you won't mind," Caleb replied, "when every office in this territory sees your name." The threat was quiet, but absolute. Hale looked around, measuring the room, the balance of power shifting away from him. By the end of the meeting, the deed was voided pending investigation. Hale left without another word. News traveled fast. Back on the land, the change was immediate. There was relief, yes, but also a deeper understanding of what had been at stake. Nell stood outside her cabin that evening, watching the last light fade. Caleb joined her, the air cool and still. "It's over," he said. "For now," she replied. "Men like him don't stop believing they're owed something." Caleb nodded. "Neither do women like you." She smiled faintly at that. The following weeks were devoted to rebuilding. Caleb ordered lumber and supplies, not for repairs, but for something sturdier. The old cabin had served its purpose, but it would not last another winter. Nell bristled at first. "I didn't ask for a new house. I didn't offer charity," Caleb said. "I offered work and a roof that won't fail." She considered his words carefully before agreeing. The new cabin rose slowly, shaped by hands that knew the land. Nell worked alongside the crew, learning each step, insisting on understanding how everything fit together. She took pride in the process, not the result. By the time the structure stood complete, the land had changed again. Grass grew thicker, streams ran clear, the basin felt renewed. Yet something unsettled Caleb. Victory had come too cleanly. Hale's silence was too complete. He knew better than to trust the absence of noise. One evening, Jonah pulled him aside. "There's talk," he said. "Hale's been asking questions farther west." Caleb looked out across the darkening fields. "Then winter isn't done testing us." Nell sensed it too. As she stood on the porch of the new cabin watching the stars emerge, she felt the past stirring, not in fear, but in resolve. She had reclaimed more than land. She had reclaimed her footing. Whatever came next, she would meet it standing. And somewhere beyond the basin, a man who thrived on quiet theft was deciding his next move, unaware that the ground beneath him was no longer as solid as it once seemed. Spring arrived without ceremony. One morning the frost was gone, and the ground, dark, damp, alive, pressed back against the boots of those who worked it. The Bighorn Basin breathed again. Streams swelled, grass pushed through the soil, and the cattle spread wider, their movements easier, unburdened by winter's weight. With the thaw came letters. Jonah rode out early one afternoon, dust on his coat, his expression focused but lighter than before. He carried a thick envelope sealed with the county mark. Caleb met him at the hitching post, already knowing what it held. "It's done," Jonah said. "Every claim Hale filed in Eleanor Avery's name has been reversed. Her land in Blue Ridge is fully restored." Caleb took the envelope, then nodded once. "Thank you." Jonah hesitated. "Legally speaking, she has every reason to leave. You know that." "I know," Caleb replied. Nell was mending a fence when Caleb found her. The work had become habit now, almost comfort. He handed her the envelope without ceremony. She read the letters slowly, carefully, as if afraid the words might shift beneath her eyes. When she finished, she folded them and held them in both hands. "It's mine again," she said. "It always was," Caleb answered. For a long moment, neither spoke. The land around them lay open and green, unchanged by what the papers declared. Nell looked out across it, toward the distant ridge, then back at Caleb. "You said I was free to go," she said. "Yes." "I won't," she replied. Caleb studied her face, searching for uncertainty. He found none. "Why?" he asked. "Because this place isn't borrowed anymore," Nell said quietly. "I earned it. Here." The answer settled between them, heavy and final. Word spread quickly through Ash Hollow. Some spoke with approval, others with thinly veiled curiosity. A woman riding the far lines, a powerful cowboy standing beside her, and a broker who had vanished under scrutiny. It was enough to stir speculation. Martha Collins watched it all from behind her counter. When Nell came into the store for the first time in weeks, Martha greeted her with a knowing smile. "Looks like you're staying," she said. "Looks that way," Nell replied. Martha nodded. "Good. This town could use someone who knows how to hold her ground." Not everyone was pleased. A few men muttered that things were changing too fast. Eli Brooks shut them down without hesitation. "She earned her place," he said. "Same as any of us." The land itself seemed to agree. Work moved smoother. Decisions came easier. Caleb found himself relying on Nell's judgment more often than he'd expected. They spoke in the evenings about water flow, grazing patterns, and repairs that would need attention before the next winter. It wasn't romance. Not yet. It was something steadier. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Caleb and Nell stood near the new cabin, watching shadows stretch across the meadow. "You ever think about staying for good?" Caleb asked. Nell smiled, small but real. "I already am." The words caught him off guard. He had built his life on certainty, on measured risks. Yet here stood a future he hadn't planned for and didn't want to turn away from. Caleb took a breath, deeper than usual. "Then we should make it official." Nell turned to him fully. "Official how?" "As partners," he said. "In land, in work, in life, equal." She studied him the way she studied contracts and weather signs, weighing what was said against what was meant. At last, she held out her hand. "All right," she said. Caleb took it, firm and certain. That fall, they married quietly. No crowd, no speeches. Just two people who had faced the land and chosen to face it together. The old cabin was torn down before winter returned. In its place, grass grew thick and green. On the ridge above the meadow, a light burned each night. Steady, warm, and visible for miles. And though the basin had tested them, it had also given them something rare. A belonging neither had expected, and neither would ever again take for granted. The first winter they faced together arrived without warning, as if the land itself wanted to see whether their choices would hold. Snow came early that year, blanketing the Bighorn Basin in a clean, relentless white. The new cabin stood firm against the wind, its walls solid, its hearth steady. From the ridge above the meadow, its lamplight cut through the dark each night, a quiet promise kept. Life did not slow simply because vows had been spoken. Nell rose before dawn, as she always had, pulling on her coat while the coffee warmed on the stove. Caleb saddled the horses by feel, his movements practiced, unhurried. They worked side by side without needing words, each knowing the other's rhythm. What had once been survival had become something stronger, shared purpose. In Ash Hollow, people noticed the difference. The fences held through the storms. The cattle wintered better than they had in years. Records were cleaner. Disputes settled faster. When trouble surfaced, it did not linger. The basin responded to steadiness the way it always had, by giving back what effort earned. Jonah visited less often now, his letters shorter, his tone lighter. There were no new claims, no sudden appearances by men like Victor Hale. Whatever ground Hale had lost, he had no appetite to reclaim. One evening in late January, a hard wind rose again, familiar and sharp. Caleb stood on the porch, watching snow gather along the fence lines. Nell joined him, a blanket draped over her shoulders. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. "The land you lost?" Nell considered this, then shook her head. "No. I miss who I was before I trusted the wrong man. But I found her again here." Caleb nodded. He understood that kind of loss, and that kind of return. Spring came slowly, careful not to promise too much at once. Snow melted into streams. Grass followed. The basin softened without losing its edge. On a quiet afternoon, Caleb and Nell rode the far boundary together, stopping where the old cabin once stood. Nothing remained but open ground and wind-shaped grass. It served its purpose, Nell said. So did a lot of things, Caleb replied. They rode on. By summer, Ash Hollow had changed in small but meaningful ways. People worked together more easily. Arguments ended quicker. The land seemed less divided, less claimed by fear. Martha Collins remarked on it one morning as she handed Nell a sack of flour. "You know," she said, "it's funny what happens when someone finally stands up and stays." Nell smiled. Sometimes staying is the bravest thing. The years that followed were not free of hardship. Drought came once, sharp and unforgiving. A sickness took part of the herd another year. But they met each trial the way they always had, together, with patience and resolve. Caleb aged into his strength rather than out of it. He rode less hard, walked more, listened longer. Nell became a fixture in the basin, sought out for her clear judgment and steady hand. She never raised her voice. She never had to. One autumn evening, as the sun sank low and painted the land gold, Caleb stood beside Nell on the ridge. The light from the cabin below had already begun to glow. "Do you regret it?" he asked. "Choosing this life?" Nell took her time answering. "No," she said. "I regret the years I spent believing I didn't deserve it." Caleb reached for her hand, their fingers fitting as naturally as they always had. The basin stretched wide and quiet before them, not owned, not conquered, simply lived on. When the first snow of another winter fell, it did so gently, settling without urgency. The land was ready. So were they. And every night, as darkness settled over the hills and draws, a single light burned steady on the ridge. A reminder that fairness, once chosen, could become a way of life, and that even in the hardest places, something enduring could be built, not from chance or charity, but from trust, earned and kept. I hope you enjoyed this story. Subscribe to my channel so you don't miss touching stories. Leave a like and then comment below what you thought of the emotional stories. See you in the next video.